my name is James Andrella, and you are listening to the second episode of the Back to Human podcast. Today, we will be discussing a topic that is very near and dear to my heart. If you've been following me for a while, you know that Jade and I are expecting a young boy in late September. And the topic of discussion today will be regarding minerals and fertility and their effects with throughout pregnancy as well. For those of you that also don't know, I am adopted. There's a fun fact for you. My adoptive mother, she struggled getting pregnant. And if it wasn't for that, everything happens for a reason. I don't know where I would be right now. So God bless her. She is one of the strongest women that I know. And I've also known several women throughout my life, especially my sister, that have also struggled with pregnancy. So I know that this is a big issue, and I feel like a lot of people are not getting the answers that they deserve through the medical system. So hopefully today we can provide some insight and maybe give you a little bit of the answers that you're looking for. So I am very excited to have on the show today Margaret Barry. She is the owner of Faith Mountain Wellness. Margaret is a functional nutritional therapy practitioner. She is a ISSA Certified Fitness Trainer and also Master T-TAP Trainer. And she is also the creator of Minerals and Motherhood Prenatal Nutrition course, which me and Jade have been following. And I can tell you through 28 weeks of pregnancy, Jade is breezing through the pregnancy. We really haven't had any hiccups, and I credit a lot of that due to the work that Margaret has been doing. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Margaret Barry.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Thank you, thank you. So Margaret, general question that I always ask everyone is, how did you get into this? How did you just start as a trainer, and what inspired you to come up with your Minerals and Motherhood nutrition course?
Yeah, so I started getting interested in nutrition and health in general just due to my own health issues as far as being a young teen, early 20s. I had a lot of fatigue. I had some body image issues. I was also just trying to find my way in terms of what resonated with me and what actually helped me and what true health actually is. I think a lot of us can relate to that, figuring out what is true health, not just in our physical body, but also mental health, spiritual health, like all of those together. So yeah, I started off really for my own interest, my own health issues, my slow thyroid function, gut issues, all of that. And then in terms of the aspect as far as pregnancy and prenatal nutrition, minerals, and postpartum health, I actually started getting interested in that wing of nutrition after the pregnancy with my first child, which didn't really go very well. I followed all the conventional prenatal advice, conventional alternatives. So even the advice that is given to women in the alternative wellness sphere, I felt like something was lacking. And I had some issues with anxiety after I had my daughter, had some issues during pregnancy, and it was not a breeze for that pregnancy. And so that kind of set me on a journey to want to understand more about the mineral components, because in time for my second child, I actually started learning more and incorporating more in terms of mineral balance and understanding kind of a different framework beyond what we normally get in the alternative wellness when it comes to pregnancy. And I really saw a huge difference in both my pregnancy and then the postpartum recovery time as well. And that shouldn't have been the case because those two kids are very close in age. They're 19 months apart, but I felt stronger. I had an easier time with the second pregnancy because I focused on those extra components of the minerals. So I started to want to share that with a broader audience because I see a lot of people that follow the traditional recommendations, whether it's from their obstetrician's office, but then also people who follow recommendations that are, I would call traditional mainstream for pregnancy. And which is, a lot of that is just eat 300 extra calories and, you know, take a prenatal and you're golden. You know, it's so much more than what is proposed in both of those spheres, the conventional and then the alternative. So yeah, but really for me, it was really the process of learning about the minerals and applying that made a huge difference. And I just wanted to keep sharing it with people because I saw how big of a difference it made for me personally, but then also with the clients that I was working with who their fourth or fifth baby, they're like, this is the best pregnancy I have had. They can compare it to prior ones. And so that's why I decided to, you know, come up with the course and put that content there, because also something else, lastly, that I want to say about this is a lot of this information, as far as the minerals and the connections to common pregnancy complaints, a lot of that information is in books that are out of print. You can't find them. It's hard to find these books that have that information from practitioners like Dr. Tom Brewer. Like, you can't access that. So I wanted to make it accessible and make that knowledge more mainstream in what I do as a practitioner. So.
Nice. Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that a lot of these books are kind of out of print. I actually tried looking for some of the Dr. Brewer books, and they're hard to come by.
Yes.
And I'll scroll through social media. I see that a lot of these like physical therapy accounts, they kind of like fight back and forth. Mm-hmm. And some of them, they kind of disregard stuff from the past. Meanwhile, they had a lot of good stuff back then. So
yes. Yeah, they definitely did. Yes.
I'm personally trying to like dig back into the oldest studies that I could possibly find and learn from there and try to implement some stuff, but it's so hard to come by.
Yeah. And, you know, that's also something else that I like is taking what was there before. So like things that were in the past. That the other day I actually had someone tell me that their obstetrician in the 80s told their mother to have a couple of raw egg yolks in milk in the afternoon to support her nutritional needs. And I'm like, you would never catch someone these days that's like a mainstream practitioner giving that advice. But we know now, it's kind of like we come full circle and we look at the nutrients that are in things like that, in eggs or in other traditional foods. And that's what I like to do too, is kind of marry the more traditional, like you were saying, the oldest studies that you can find, like the salt studies that were done in pregnancy way back in the 50s, and then marrying that with what we know of the modern mineral balance and how that affects us as well. So I kind of like taking those two, because oftentimes what's old is new again. You know, oh, you need electrolytes in pregnancy. And I'm like, yeah, that's something we've known for a while. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So how did you come across Dr. Brewer's work? Like what rabbit hole did you go down? Because obviously some mm-hmm. stuff always has to happen.
Yes.
Clearly there were some complications during the first pregnancy.
Mm-hmm. So yes.
What was your like beacon? What led you down that route? How'd you discover him?
So with my daughter's pregnancy, I had some weird stuff going on with my blood pressure where I was, you know, exercising 5 days a week. I was not eating too much, you know, as we're supposed to do. Don't gain too much weight in pregnancy, you know, all those things that they tell you. And it was actually a search. I was doing a web search because when I was, you know, being told, well, it may be anxiety, but we're not sure, but your blood pressure whenever you come in is always, you know, trending high. And some of it I do think was anxiety, but a lot of it I think was my body trying to pick up the slack from what I was not giving it in terms of the minerals and the nutrients that I needed. So I literally did a web search, help for, you know, high blood pressure in pregnancy, like natural, you know, looking at natural things. And I would find things like, oh, you need to just drink more water in pregnancy. You need to just take magnesium. It's just magnesium. That's what you need. So I would try those things for a week or two, didn't really see a difference. And then I stumbled upon Dr. Brewer's website, because he has that website that is, I believe it's still kept up by one of the nurses that still teaches it, and a midwife as well, that kind of collaborate on that website. And I remember starting to read some of the physiology notes, and something clicked in my brain. I was like, oh my goodness, this makes so much sense. A lot of us are told, you know, make sure you're not eating this, don't eat too much salt, make sure that you don't eat too many calories, you know, all these things that we're told traditionally in pregnancy. And I was kind of making those tie-ins to what he was teaching as far as the blood volume expansion, the importance of that throughout pregnancy. And reading that, something clicked in my brain, and I just started to realize that this made so much sense. And I started feeling like, why is no one else talking about this? Why did I have to like dig and go down the rabbit hole myself to kind of find this information? And I was just wondering why it was not mentioned in more mainstream circles. And one of the things too is that you'll often see in other books, so you can read even, conventional or alternative pregnancy books. Sometimes they'll mention his work in passing. They're like, by the way, check out his work. And then people go, okay. And they start reading his work and they're like, whoa, this is a lot of information and I don't have time to parse through. Because when you're on the clock, if you're already pregnant, you're on the clock and you're like, oh man, I've got to get this right. I only have a certain number of weeks to go. So that's why, looking ahead or starting early can be helpful, because people don't want to have to, it's hard for them to wade through that information, and having it in a way that's more synthesized was what I was hoping to do with it as far as the applications for that. But it was really my own experience and, understanding the mechanism behind that, because people treat things like, gestational hypertension, preeclampsia, they treat blood pressure issues in pregnancy as one would outside of pregnancy, which is just not how it works. And that's like the biggest thing for me when I realized that. I was like, oh, that's why treating someone like they're a 74-year-old man with hypertension when they are a young pregnant woman who is having blood pressure issues, there's huge differences there in the physiology. And that's what I appreciated about his work as far as it being addressed in that way.
I'm surprised you were even able to find that on the internet, because a lot of that stuff's it's hidden.
Yes. And this was, this is 2017, so it was a couple years ago. I feel like they've started to clamp down even more in the last couple years on that information, just because they don't. It's like they don't want you to find it.
The good stuff you got to go digging for.
Yes, it's very true.
And I feel like you did such a good job at condensing all that information down, because it can be extremely overwhelming, but you presented it in a way that's like very easily digestible. So
well, thank you. It was my goal to kind of try to bring it together in that way, because it is overwhelming, especially if you are 8 weeks pregnant and not feeling good and you're trying to how do I get this information in action steps for me to follow? So
yeah, there's the panic mode that can set in, and then the people that you want to go to, the trusted sources, they really, honestly, they can't help you out too much, which is it's a shame. It's like, where do you go for help now?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So infertility seems to be a massive issue right now, probably more than ever. And what's strange is that information with Dr. Brewer was available in the past, maybe not so readily available as it is now with the internet. But I feel like, I guess through the 1970s, I'm pulling a number out of my butt right now, but 1970s to early 2000s, I feel like that generation really got the shaft when it came to any type of health advice. So many people, they'll go different routes in order to try to get pregnant. And those honestly don't even work too well themselves. So.
Yes.
So why do you believe infertility is such a big issue right now? And what do you think that people can be focusing on in order to become a little bit more fertile or correct this issue?
Yeah, it is becoming a big issue. I feel like we're seeing it even more. There's been scary forecasts as far as how much worse it's going to get in the coming years if we don't do anything about it. So I think that there are several factors at play. And I think it's also easy to look at this and be like, okay, it's just the heavy metals, or it's just the mold or the other toxicity that we're exposed to. Because yes, we do know that babies born have over 100 different chemicals, in their cord blood. They've actually found that when you test that on a newborn baby, they've already got all of that in them. So there are those factors, but also I like to look at things that are maybe the foundational support. So for example, a lot of people will say, and I agree with this, that heavy metals can be a problem when it comes to fertility and trying to conceive. And I would also say, okay, yes, heavy metals, but then you look at the minerals, which are the antagonists to those metals, and they are very protective against those metals. So it's kind of one of those, chicken or the egg situations, like which came first? Was it the heavy metal toxicity, or was it the mineral deficiency that allowed us to develop the heavy metal toxicity that we know can play a role in that? So yeah, heavy metals definitely can. What they do in the body is that they displace certain receptor sites. So for example, in all your organs, you've got these enzymes, and all those enzymes run on minerals. So if you have an enzyme in the liver that is running a detox function, and your body doesn't have adequate levels of mineral saturation in those enzymes, then we are exposed to a metal, which we know can take place of minerals in enzyme sites. So those come in and they crowd out the minerals. The minerals aren't able to get a seat at the table, so to speak. Sometimes I like to think about it as musical chairs, like your cells and enzymes. So you've got those there. When one is displaced, it's got to find another spot to plug in, or it's just going to be flushed out of the body. Or another heavy metal is going to take its seat in using that same analogy. So that is something that's important to understand. You can have that those enzymes swapped out of the metals and end up having maladaptive body chemistry, because now those enzyme cells in the liver can't perform their functions optimally, and you have slow detoxification, issues with more toxin load coming in. So it really can impact us in many ways with that. So minerals, of course, will protect us against the heavy metals. They kind of help us displace them, crowd them out, and they protect us against the heavy metals as well. Now, also in terms of men, so there's male and female infertility, and I'll talk more about the female infertility as well. But for men, so a lot of times a common one that I'm seeing these days as well is a zinc deficiency or an imbalance between the zinc and the copper in the body. So we have to have a correct balance of that. And especially there is such a thing as where it's called slow sperm, where the sperm are not actually as mobile or as able to move to the egg as they should be. And that can be linked to toxicity, but it can also be linked to zinc as well, a need for that. Interestingly, back to heavy metals, you can see things like mercury displace or make zinc be biounavailable. So this is very common to see for men who have exposure to mercury in some way. That's going to deplete their zinc. That can make them have sperm that is less potent, and you can see kind of a downstream issue with that as well. Now, another thing here too is plastics, and they're called phthalates, but they're basically these compounds that are sometimes also referred to as forever chemicals, because we don't really know how they are able to get out. I do think that the body can get things out like that, even though people say, oh, it's impossible. I'm like, I think the body's pretty powerful, and when we provide it with what it needs, I think we can see positive changes with that. But that's another one that people will be impacted by, men and women. And also another one here too is that sometimes, I've also seen this in my colleagues as well, is having different pathogens or even parasites that affect your body's ability to reproduce effectively. And one reason for that is that parasites and pathogens, fungal issues, overgrowth of bacteria, all of those can affect our body's mineral stores and nutrient stores, because they basically steal those substrates and use them for themselves. So if you're getting, for example, a good amount of zinc, a good amount of selenium, but you've got some kind of underlying fungal pathogen bacteria in there, it's going to be taking, a good percentage of that for itself, because it doesn't want you, the host, to get all of its food that it's mooching off of you. But I also see people will run after things like parasites right away, when we really need to address sometimes in tandem. So for example, a lot of times we end up with bacterial overgrowth, parasites, or even things like SIBO, candida overgrowth. We end up with those because of a low metabolic rate in the body as a whole. And people will go all the time and like, okay, we've got to address these issues. But if they don't address the underlying metabolic dysfunction, the low stomach acid that allowed our body to continue to feed the fungus or feed the parasites, then we're going to just have a perpetual issue unless we address both at the same time, and we're able to support the detoxification in the balance of that, as well as making sure that we're repleting the nutrients that we need to. Now, another one on here too is just general, like we were talking about, general toxin exposure. So they've done studies on chemicals like glyphosate. Those can accumulate in the body. They can accumulate in reproductive organs, the liver. They can be found in higher concentrations there as well. And that can also burden the liver, and then the liver can't get rid of the aforementioned toxins. So some molds, funguses, metals are going to be leaving the body through the bile. And if that's not flowing well through the liver gallbladder, then we're going to see more toxin load in the body when we might not realize that that's occurring. So it's just sneaky things like that that can come in and, affect us. So those are a couple of the ones too that I see as the biggest ones. And just to recap here, so heavy metals and subsequent mineral deficiencies, mycotoxins, fungus, parasites, bacteria that can affect and steal our body's stores of nutrients. We can have compounds like glyphosate. We can have the plastics or estrogenic compounds coming in from those as well. The endocrine disruptors, they are known endocrine disruptors that we continue to have in our food supply, and it's just, they're becoming ubiquitous. But all that being said, so a couple of things that I think people should be doing in terms of wanting to support their fertility. So the number one thing for me would be to support obviously I'm biased because of my knowledge of the minerals, but a big one would be supporting your intake of nutrient-dense foods. So this is huge. A lot of people don't realize that, for example, if they say, I eat a lot of vegetables, I eat a lot of fruits, I should be good to go on the minerals, but we know that the soil is more depleted, therefore the food that's grown in it is also more depleted. So focusing on the foods that are going to give you the most bang for your buck. So a lot of the traditional, like we were talking about earlier, the traditional foods to support fertility, we know that they are also the most nutrient dense, which makes total sense. In some other cultures, they will actually provide a woman who is preparing to become pregnant, they will have her drink quite a bit of raw milk and cream every day, egg yolks, seafood, as much as they can to help support and prepare for preconception. But a couple of really good ones here too are seafoods are incredibly nutrient dense. So things like oysters, things like mussels, any type of shellfish is going to have a broad spectrum of all of those minerals. So it's going to have things like selenium, zinc, it's going to have some fatty acids, it's going to have, oftentimes it will have retinol as well, which I'm sure we'll talk about later as well. But it will also have quality protein, it's going to have some iodine in it. And for example, mussels are a great source of B vitamins. In fact, they literally have the same makeup of B vitamins as a B complex does that you could buy, people buy from the store. It's a food-based source of that, and it's incredibly nutrient dense and protective of the body. So seafoods are wonderful. Of course, organ meats, everyone is talking about those now, but they are so incredibly nutrient dense. The amount of nutrition that you can get in 1 ounce of a beef liver or a beef kidney or beef heart is going to be far superior than 1 ounce of literally any other thing that you could possibly eat. So when it comes to nutrient density, that's one of the ones that I would prioritize, because like we were saying earlier, if you're able to get more minerals in the diet, that can support you in the safe excretion. In fact, it's the most natural way to excrete heavy metals rather than doing a bunch of crazy protocols that are very extreme and very harsh. It's actually the most natural way that you can support the heavy metals in the body as far as balancing that out. A couple other ones here too, of course. Eggs are wonderfully nutrient dense. They have a lot of choline in them, and choline is extremely important when it comes to fertility, but also development of the baby's brain as well. We use quite a bit of that. You have, I think it's over 200% for 1 egg yolk. So 1 egg yolk gives you over 200% of choline's daily value, which is crazy. And so a couple other ones here too. So like we were talking about seaweed, or seafood, seaweeds are also great. They have a lot of iodine, they have a lot of selenium, a lot of protective minerals. You can even do those in like the flakes that they make that are easy to put in foods and mix them into other dishes. Another one that I don't hear talked about a lot, but I think is really cool in terms of the research is bee products. So bee pollen, royal jelly, and also honey, of course, everyone's favorite. But all of those have different enzymes and beneficial B vitamins as well. But they also have a really cool compound called nucleic acid. And nucleic acid is necessary for DNA, RNA synthesis. So obviously, if you're growing a human that's going to be creating cell replication, you want those cells to replicate in a healthy way. And that can support in terms of being a good functional food for that as well. Now, of course, dairy as tolerated, some people don't tolerate it very well, and there's a lot of reasons for that. But obviously raw dairy, non-homogenized or low temp pasteurized, those are kind of some of the spectrum when it comes to dairy. You've got the raw, you've got the low temp pasteurized, which is heated but not as high as regular pasteurization, and then the non-homogenized. So non-homogenized dairy is going to be the type where the cream comes to the top. When you shake the bottle, it will disperse it evenly through that. When those particles are not suspended in the mixture, it actually enables the body to be able to absorb those better, and it just allows your body to benefit from some of those other enzymes, minerals, because milk does have quite a few trace minerals in it too. But a couple other notes on here on this point. So generally supporting the liver as far as natural detoxification. So like we're talking about with doing things like the minerals to support the replenishment of the minerals that are going to power that liver. We really want to make sure that we're providing it with what it needs. Also, the proper protein levels are great for supporting the liver, because the liver is going to use those amino acids to detoxify. It's one of those, phase 1, phase 2 of liver detox. It's actually part of the amino acids are part of that process as well. We've got to have them in the diet to support that. And then also any other, so I'm a big fan, and traditional cultures are as well, of sauna and therapies like that. It's so beneficial for mitochondrial health, for detoxification. And of course, you want to do that in preparing for pregnancy. You can't do it in pregnancy because you don't want to push too much detox. But that's great to do for both partners. So both parts of the DNA, because it's like a 50-50 split, right? Or almost of the two parts. So doing that is great. And also one other thing on here too that I was going to mention in terms of nutrients, vitamin E, so mixed tocopherols. This has been studied in terms of promoting fertility in both partners, but especially for females. And this is because it helps decrease our progesterone burn rate, and progesterone is necessary for sustaining a pregnancy until the placenta can produce its own progesterone around 20 weeks or so. It's actually the word tocopherol in the Greek means to carry, and that's kind of speaks to its ability to support fertility and egg quality as well. There's been really cool studies on vitamin E mixed tocopherols in terms of like female egg quality. But it supports that, but then it also can support the quality of the hormones going into that. So those are some of the things that I think that people could be focusing on in terms of wanting to support fertility without, depleting themselves further, which is often what happens when people go really extreme on things.
You said raw milk, and I swear a light bulb went off in my head. You're speaking my language, because that's one of my favorite things. I post about it all the time. And you actually convinced me to drop my Lululemon. I got rid of my polyester gym shorts.
Oh yes, that's another thing. I had that on here, but I didn't go over it as far as the polyester. Like that's another light bulb moment for a lot of people is, okay, if you think about it, if you have really compressed, like if you're really compressing, these guys that wear compression briefs or compression, you're compressing that whole area, which should have blood flow in order to produce good sperm quality. But then they also, you've got polyester underwear or pants or whatever. And it's like, Oh, I never made that connection before, but it's good to have that. I know they have done some studies as far as sperm quality from men who wear a really tight compression underwear and more loose styles. So yeah, that's another one too that a lot of people don't think about.
I've also read that the vitamin E is the anti-sterility hormone or vitamin.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes, it's so cool. The research on that. There's a doctor, his last name is Shute. I forget how to spell it. I think it's Shute, I'm pretty sure. But I have one of his books. A lot of his books, again, are out of print, just like Dr. Brewer's. A lot of his research is hard to find, but he talks about that too, as far as being supportive for both partners and traditionally being used in terms of the foods, because there are foods that will have it naturally in there. And in his books, he talks more about, like, I think wheat germ was the thing they used back in the olden days, kind of like with the cod liver as well. And speaking of, that's another one that I love for pregnancy and preconception is retinol in the form of, food form. So the foods that are going to have that retinol in them are going to be things like beef liver. You're going to get it in like cod livers. So we can talk about that too, but I love the whole cod livers where it's just the whole liver, and you can incorporate that into your diet. And it's a very rich source of retinol, which is so many roles. It helps us hold on to minerals. It helps us use iron. It can even help us retain very important minerals for pregnancy, like potassium. So that's another one that, in the olden days, you think about it, grandmas were giving kids cod liver oil back in the day. They also would give them wheat germ oil. And it's like they knew, like, vitamin A, and also there's vitamin E in the wheat germ oil, although we do have better options for that these days in terms of vitamin E. But it's just, again, it's what's old is new again. It's kind of cool how that comes full circle, because certainly back in the day, we know that people didn't have as many issues with fertility as we're experiencing these days, like IVF and the ways of conceiving outside of the considerable normal route, or whatever we want to call it. That wasn't even on the radar until a couple decades ago. It was just not something that people struggled with. So it does make me think about that combination of the lack of nutrients, or there's lower nutrient density in the diet, and also the increase in toxins and environmental exposures that we have today. I mean, you look back at menus. That's one of my favorite things to do, and you may like to do this too. I love to go back and look at old menus. Like, this is what people used to eat. And it would be, so cool. And you're like, oh, they ate, we're going to have an appetizer, and it's beef kidney sliced horizontally with some cheese on top and I'm like, wow, that was just normal. It's just normal.
Could you imagine if they served that at Chili's nowadays?
People would have a fit. They would not be able to hang with that.
There'd be protests.
Yes, there would.
So it's crazy how far we've gotten from that, like, ancestral living in the traditional foods. Like, people are scared of egg yolks too. I know you mentioned that as well. So.
Oh, big time. Very, very, a lot of fear and around cholesterol and all of that. Yeah, all of those things, which we do need cholesterol to make steroid hormones, which they don't tell you when people, shy away from products that have cholesterol in it. It's just like, interesting.
Actually, I believe it was Dr. Tennant. I listened to one of his videos, and he mentioned that Ansel Keys actually came out and said that we've known that cholesterol was not related to heart disease. And we've known that the whole time.
Yep. I believe it. All of his data that he had supposedly, that it is that whole scandal with his the data manipulation. And they even know, and actually learned this last year. I did not know this until last year, but there's a very small amount of the cholesterol that we do absorb it from food, but it's only like in the 33% range, and then our body manufactures the rest of it. So it is important to get those in, but people will be scared to get in cholesterol, not realizing that their body actually takes care of that a lot by itself. And that oftentimes if someone has, for example, really high cholesterol, it may be an indicator of some level of inflammation, and not that they're like, oh, you're eating too many eggs. It's crazy how that is just something that people don't talk about.
Yeah. As a kid, I was actually recommended not to eat eggs for that exact reason.
Oh, man.
So I didn't really think too much about the heavy metals and them binding the receptor sites. So that'd be something similar to like how fluoride takes up the receptor sites for iodine or bromide as well. So do you believe that just, I guess, upping those minerals would help detox those heavy metals alone, or would you have to go to something like a zeolite?
That's a good question. So I think it can depend on sometimes the severity for someone. So someone who swam in a chlorinated pool for 15 years is going to be different than someone who maybe they went to the pool twice a year and they're exposed to chlorine in that way. So I think it can depend on the person for that. But I think for a lot of people, they can see positive changes when they just start incorporating the antagonist to the thing that they are exposed to or the thing that's showing up. So I've actually seen with clients too, where people will incorporate something like more sea salt. They'll just do more sea salt, which has an antagonistic relationship with arsenic and also aluminum. And then they will have testing done and their body is actively getting rid of the aluminum in the body. And it was just because they started adding in more of the mineral antagonist. The body is really smart and knows what to do. And it's like, oh, cool. We've got some more of these raw materials. Let's just kick it on out and get that out of the body. We don't need it anymore. We've got plenty of this other material to place there. So yeah, so it can also, like I said, if someone has a really severe, for example, they have mercury fillings. That's a huge, like dental stuff, huge for, infertility or exposure to certain substances like mercury, even though they say that it's not a problem. Although I think it was last year or the year before that the regulatory agency actually said that, hey, we kind of aren't sure now for pregnancy about this. And I was like, well, it's about time for them to start recognizing that. But if you have someone who they get their mercury fillings removed, they may want to include some things in there as well that can kind of trap onto and carry that out of the body. So there's a ton of different like supportive binders depending on what the person is dealing with. So there are ones that are more specific for certain metals or even radioactive materials. So there is one that's carbonized bamboo that some people will use for the radioactive and also mycotoxin. And then like you're saying, zeolite's another one that a lot of people will use, or it's in a blend with something else, some of the other carbon binders too. But sometimes that will be needed to help the body get a leg up in terms of its ability to move that out of the body. But once you get to a certain point, you can just be maintaining that progress and making sure your minerals are good. Some people even add in something like a sauna just as a way of naturally supporting that. I've seen a lot of people do minerals and sauna together, and that takes care of so many of their symptoms too related to the heavy metals, because you can have symptoms associated with different ones, and people will notice that improves or they feel better when they include those two modalities. So.
Interesting. Let me see. So obviously there's the ancestral food that we could recommend to absolutely everyone, but with modern day society, I feel like that's a very hard sell for people. So, and I'm curious, I've always kind of seen it from a different light. I could be absolutely wrong on this one, but as far as like binging on fast foods or something like that, I feel like that actually comes from a mineral deficiency. And the reason why you can't satiate yourself is because there's nothing in that food. It has no nutritional value, no matter how many calories you're ingesting, like you're not getting what you need there. And I'm curious if that is part of why women experience all these weird cravings. Like their body is yelling and screaming at them. It's like, hey, I need this, like seaweed, iodine, something like that. And Jade really has not had many cravings. I'm so proud of her for this.
That's amazing.
Her pregnancy, really no cravings at all. So I'm curious, what your experience is with once you correct these mineral deficiencies. Do a lot of the experiences like mood swings, cravings, morning sickness, or I know preeclampsia, like do these things just kind of go away?
Yeah, that's a good question, and that's really cool that your wife that she's seen that, where it's like, oh, I'm not like 3 a.m. I've got to have this random food item, which a lot of people do have that. But I'm definitely a believer in terms of, you know, like you were saying, people having cravings is oftentimes a sign that they're lacking something and they need that. So I've had women who will say, for example, in pregnancy, that they crave lemons and citrus, and you know what's in lemons and citrus is folate. So you actually have folate in those. So for my first pregnancy, I would eat like a lemon like I would eat an orange. And I was like, I don't know what the deal is with this. Maybe it's the vitamin C, but then later I realized, oh, there's folate in citrus foods. So my body was really, it's trying to search and find that. So sometimes you can see that direct tie-in. So even, for example, if a woman craves in pregnancy, like burnt toast, I will see that too, where it's like charred burnt toast. And that is oftentimes a mineral, like it's a need for minerals. Sometimes it's a need for more carbon minerals. It's a need for things like phosphorus that the body is just lacking. And it's always searching for that, because I think the body's very smart in terms of, you know, seeking things out and, you know, getting you to go towards the things that you need. But to your point about for example, with like fast food, people will eat a lot of volume of calories, but there's no value as far as the nutrient density of it. That happens so much. And also something else I see when women move to a more whole foods, like full diet with more whole foods in it, is that sometimes they will find themselves intentionally or unintentionally under eating, because it's more calorie dense to go get a giant soda that has 400 calories of, you know, corn syrup in it. And, you know, maybe their meal total would be 1,000 calories. But if you make that at home, it's going to be more nutrients. There's not going to be as much caloric filler there. But that's where I kind of say that quality and quantity matters, because we want to make sure we're getting enough, but also we want to make sure that the density of the nutrients is present, so that we get the best of both worlds, because you want to not be intentionally under eating, but you want to be supplying with nutrients in the body too. Now, another example in pregnancy as far as cravings, where it's the body just looking for something, is it's called pica. And this is something where women will crave really weird things like laundry detergent or dirt, or you know, things like that, where it's like, that's so strange. Why would they be searching for that? And usually it is a nutrient deficiency. It all goes back, if you look at the Venn diagram of why this person's, you know, wanting to crave, you know, eating dirt. Maybe they need some fulvic and humic acid support in their body. Maybe they need the minerals that are there. Their body is trying so hard to get it. And I do find that women who are going into pregnancy have been working on minerals, or they're really trying to focus on that in their prep for pregnancy, that they have less insistent, like they're not that person who's like, wow, I've got to have this random food item from the grocery store at this time of night, because they are actually nourishing themselves consistently. And their body is like, we know that she's going to be providing us with stuff, so we don't have to send out this SOS. We need to have this popsicle right now, or whatever it is. It kind of supplies you with what you need. And if you go into that with better nutrient stores, you're going to have less insistent, I must get that type of cravings. Now, you may have, for example, with my son, I didn't have as many cravings than I did with my daughter. With my daughter, it was very much like I would call my husband at work and I'd be like, I need to have that slushy that you can get at this one restaurant in town that uses, like, you know, the lemons and cranberries, or whatever the mixture it was. I was also obsessed with cranberries, interestingly, which is high in potassium. So I've just retroactively looked at so many of these like, that makes total sense. But I didn't have those type of cravings. I would have where I would just be like, wow, this glass of milk is just hits the spot. This is so good. I'm going to eat that. And it's just hits the spot, satiated, don't have to pursue that and be really insistent upon it as far as cravings go. And also, this is something that she has to look forward to as well, because when you're breastfeeding, after you have your baby and you're breastfeeding, that's usually when women's hunger and cravings also goes through the roof. And if you are consistent with your nutrition during pregnancy and going into postpartum, you're likely going to experience less of that crazy hunger levels that most women will experience with breastfeeding, where it's like, I'm going to pass out if I don't have something to eat. Again, you're better nourished, you're going into it, and you will have less of a hard time getting your body what it needs in terms of nutrition, because you will be hungry, but it's just not to the same level, is what I've noticed too. But even like what you're saying about morning sickness, for example, morning sickness is one of those where there's a lot of moving parts, but some of the most common ones that I see are blood sugar issues. Most women don't eat enough protein to begin with, and they end up having massive blood sugar roller coaster, hypoglycemic episodes where the blood sugar's high, then it dips really low, and then it goes high, and then it goes low. And that can also tie in with mood swings. So I find that the mood swings and the blood sugar go hand in hand. If someone is having a lot of extreme emotional struggles, sometimes that can be the blood sugar. The body's like, where are we going here? We need stability. We need to like keep that in a good range on our blood sugar. So that's a big one too with morning sickness. I have also seen some women where they are still doing most of the right things. Like they do have good nutrient stores. They do a good job with like supporting B vitamins, supporting magnesium, supporting their blood sugar. They do a good job, and they still have some morning sickness, but it's not as debilitating, because there are some women who have absolutely debilitating morning sickness. They cannot eat, hold anything down. They end up having to go in the hospital to, have fluids to keep them alive, basically. So I've had a couple of women who, after working on this, their morning sickness is very manageable, because some of it can be from the hormones. It's very manageable, whereas before it was maybe just out of control, and the strategies that people gave them to work on it didn't work for them. And now it's like they are following some of those strategies, and it's actually making a difference, whereas before it was just not really changing anything. But I think that they can be like, especially if people take time to prepare, because most people don't think about like before pregnancy. Most people don't really think about it until they are pregnant and throwing up at 7 weeks pregnant. So it is great to think about that ahead of time in preparation for it. And also just knowing that for the vast majority of women, if someone does have morning sickness or nausea, usually it's just that like stomach doesn't feel well. That's kind of how it was for my second. With my first, I was much more sick than with my second, just anecdotally. But knowing that it will let up, like for most people, when the hormones change a little bit more at like 14, 15 weeks, that's usually when most people will be like, all right, it's better now. It's not as all encompassing on their life. So
second trimester is supposed to be like the glory phase, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
No, I'm not a woman, but God bless you women. You guys are so strong, so damn strong.
Yes, the second trimester is the best. It's the best part. Like with both of mine, I felt really good, and even in the third, like I think that's something where a lot of people will tell women, oh, it's so bad. Like when we talk about pregnancy, it's always so negative. It's always like, oh, it's the worst. Oh, it's just terrible. I loved it. I was like, I felt my best. I felt my most energized, or just most myself for some reason. And I think it's important to even tell people and help them know, like, it's possible to feel really good and be like, hey, I actually feel pretty strong and capable. And that energy carries you into postpartum when a little sleep deprived, things are a little wonky on the mood, that confidence and feeling can kind of carry you into that as well. Because it makes me sad when people are just telling other women, oh, it's just the worst ever. Everything, birth's bad, pregnancy's bad. And I'm like, we don't need that kind of negativity. Like, it doesn't have to be like that. So.
Makes it so where you don't really look forward to it, I suppose. Right.
Yeah. And it makes people be like, I don't want to do that. And my goal is to make people be like, yeah, you can do that. And you can feel darn good while you do it. Like, you can. It's possible.
Yeah. No, I'm so happy with how Jade's experiencing this. And I do credit your course to helping us out with that. We're taking the Shilajit oil beef liver capsules because I can't get her to eat beef liver. There's no way.
Yes, that's hard.
And it's she's cruising through adrenal cocktails too.
Nice.
I believe that's what kind of helps with the swelling.
Yes, it's those minerals. The salt too.
The salt or the potassium?
This kind of both, yes, but both of those are really important. Yeah, for swelling, water retention, making sure that we have adequate levels of those because that helps with that blood volume too. So yeah, super important. That's awesome that you're incorporating those things because those are all great. So
as far as like drinking water, I don't think a lot of people know this. They'll chug down like Zephyr Hills and then they'll get all the phthalates and
yes.
yeah, all that nice chemical cocktail. It's like that water is kind of dead water. It doesn't have any minerals in it, and it's not actually hydrating you. You're kind of just peeing it out. So, so I guess, I mean, I kind of covered this, but if you had to recommend, because it's going to be very hard to convince women to eat beef liver, if you had to name like 5 or 6 supplements, what would you suggest? And then what is typically recommended, whether it's a midwife? I know we were recommended to up our iron. If you mind explaining why that might not be the best idea, because I know that's a common recommendation.
Oh yes, I would be glad. That's like my number one. That's my number one pet. I get twitchy when I hear someone being like, they just said to add more iron. I'm like, no, not yet. Like, don't do that. So typically, like in terms of prenatals and vitamins, it's really kind of abysmal what the norm recommendations are. It's literally just pick your favorite prenatal formula and take that, and you're good. And you don't need to worry about nutrient density, all that. You just pop the prenatal, usually with fish oil too, like really refined fish oil for, the fats in there. But that's typically what they will, the regular recommendation will be. I remember going to the practice that I'm no longer a part of because I just did not like my whole experience. I kind of went outside of that system a little bit. But I remember them giving me this, prescription for like a prescription prenatal, and the ingredients were awful. It was all non-methylated forms of B vitamins, which we know most people are not able to absorb. It was a huge misstep on like the vitamin A. It was like beta carotene form, ascorbic acid for the vitamin C. And I was shocked, but I shouldn't have been shocked as far as the, being given that recommendation by a professional. But it just firmly reminded me of why I do what I do and why I want to go beyond the traditional, dispensed advice for it. So as far as the top, I would say like the top 4 or 5 things. So definitely, like you're saying, the organ meats, and that's tricky to get in, but capsules are an option. So the desiccated liver capsules, you can get the liver desiccated, you can get a blend of like 5 or 6 different organ meats. So you could get things like spleen, adrenal gland, even of the bovine. You can get the liver, get the kidneys, heart, and other stuff like that in a freeze-dried form. And honestly, that can work really well. Now, sometimes women will do where you have like grass-fed beef. So you'll have a blend where it is mostly grass-fed beef, and then part of it is grass-fed organs. And I've found that if you use that and you season it really well, and maybe you add your barbecue sauce that you made or some kind of garlic and pasta sauce situation in a meatball, most women can get that down if it's well done. And another one too, as far as that goes, for more of the zinc, because the organ meats are going to have a wide variety of nutrients. They're going to have B vitamins. They're going to have quite a bit of folate, which is necessary for neural tube development and all of that. They're also going to have a lot of copper. So that's like the copper biased one. Now for zinc and selenium, mostly that's what, oysters mostly contain. Most women, obviously, we wouldn't be doing raw. That there's debates on whether or not that's okay. An easy way to get that in anyway is to do the canned oysters. But a little hack that I found for pregnant women, because you could not have paid me to eat an oyster in the first trimester with either of my children, I would have projectile vomited. You can actually chop those oysters up. So you just get a good brand. The Crown Prince is one. You can get the water packed or the olive oil packed ones. I usually get the water packed ones. Chop it up really fine and put it in a burger, put it in a meatball, put it in a meatloaf. You will not taste it. I've made it for my whole family. I've made it for people who are pregnant, and no one noticed that it's there. So that's a way to like sneak in the oysters as well. Now, another one here too, as far as the things to get in, as far as supplementation, definitely some kind of trace minerals, whether that's something like Shilajit, whether it's something like a fulvic humic mineral blend. Those are really important to get you that broad spectrum support of those mineral substrates. Because again, in pregnancy, you're going to be using around 10% of your mineral stores are going to go to your baby. So you just multiply that out by how many kids you've already had or are going to have, and you'll quickly realize that it's important to replete that. So that's another one that is very important with those three. And then also, I'm a big fan, like I was talking earlier, about the cod livers. So like the whole livers. Some people do the cold pressed cod liver oil. I'm just a fan of the whole cod livers. You can usually get them. They're sourced from Iceland, and they're usually packed in their own oil. So this is different from fish oil. So with someone's recommending fish oil versus someone recommending a cod liver, because the cod liver comes directly from the cod, it's just the liver, and fish oil is the whole fish put into and extracted into an oil. So I find that that's much more volatile. So for women, I'll also say, get some foods in your diet that are whole food sources of that anyway. But I really like the cod livers, and it really doesn't take much to get how much you need. And in all honesty, I think that vitamin A is one of the most controversial, like in terms of pregnancy, because people are like, oh, don't do too much vitamin A. You might have birth defects, or you might have this problem or that. There's a huge controversy on that. And of all the research that I've found, most of the studies that they performed were done with high dose beta carotene, which is different from retinol. And when we have high beta carotene, the liver is like, how did we get this much beta carotene? There's not that much in whole foods. How did this girl get this much beta carotene? And it kind of has problems processing it. Same thing for artificial forms of vitamin A. Like people will be able to get huge super physiological doses, much higher than you would get in like a cod liver when they are supplementing with that. So if you're doing something that's in a whole food form like that, that's one of the ones that I will see that people are so deficient in. I mean, I honestly have theories on how it's it's literally a generational thing. Your grandma, maybe your great grandma didn't get enough, and then she had 10 kids, and then one of those kids was your grandma, and so forth, so on and so forth. And it's just, I think that we can pass that deficiency along because it is stored in the body. But anyway, that's another one that I love to include. You really don't need, like I said, you need like maybe a half or a quarter of a can per week. And besides that too, the upper limit of that is much higher in terms of even the rate that they did the bad forms of vitamin A, like beta carotene. It took a huge amount over a very, a long period of time to get to that amount, because there's always the question of vitamin A toxicity. So I wanted to mention that as well. And so another one as well, as far as something to include supplementally, magnesium is definitely something that will be very important. We are using quite a bit of magnesium in pregnancy. And of course, you would want to pair that alongside with the sodium and potassium, kind of like we touched on earlier. That's so important for growing the blood volume, but also helping us use the magnesium. So I think of those three as kind of a unit, making sure you're getting sodium and potassium, but then adding in the magnesium into the diet, whether that is from a liquid bicarbonate form, whether that's from magnesium glycinate, or something that is like a lotion, like a magnesium lotion that can go topically on the skin too. So those are a couple of the ones that I would do. And of course, one other one that I wanted to mention is either the vitamin A or or vitamin E, or something like a whole food vitamin C, because we are going to use that at higher rates in pregnancy too. So if I had to pick, that would kind of be my stack. Maybe doing the vitamin E as far as supporting those levels of progesterone, liver detoxification, and then the vitamin C for supporting the adrenal glands, because the adrenal glands are so important and they store most of our body's vitamin C content. So if you do a tissue like sample of the adrenal gland, it's going to have a lot of our body's content stored there. So that's kind of a direct feedback for the adrenal glands. But those are some of the ones that I would include. I think that the recommendations are vastly underselling women on the importance and the power that you can have when you incorporate the right nutrients for pregnancy.
Yeah, and they're not really going to find that in a multivitamin prenatal, especially not the ratios that you need.
Exactly. They're really not going to going to get that. And then there's the thing where not everyone is there. They think, okay, they're just not willing to put that time, into the effort, into procuring the foods or seeking out the foods that are nutritious. So that's where it gets tricky, because sometimes people will be like, okay, well, I want a prenatal that's formulated, with a good form, or, stuff like that. But they do have to have that commitment. Like, are you wanting to add in these? Because it is kind of like a little, it's a little scavenger hunt to get these nutrients, but it is fun. And after a little while, as I always like to joke, by the time 9 months rolls around, you're real good at it. And then it's time to go into postpartum, but you can continue that in postpartum as well. Like, a lot of it will apply if you are in that time frame as well. It's mutually beneficial for both those stages. So.
Yeah, I recall from a lot of your posts too, that oftentimes, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, that instead of recommending magnesium right away, you'll actually tell people to get on the sodium potassium first.
Yes. That is, and honestly, I need to do some more content around this, because this is a huge thing I see. You'll see sometimes in the, for example, the chronic illness, like the folks who are working through things like Lyme or mold or and stuff like that, they have what's called the order of operations, so you take care of this before you take care of that. And you have this like little, it's almost like a little steps that you can go through to ensure that you aren't missing something that could affect a step ahead. So in this case, restoring the sodium and potassium prior to moving to magnesium means that the body is going to be able to use the magnesium better. And this is something that I'll see all the time, especially moms who are very burnt out. We aren't repleting with sodium. We aren't getting enough potassium. But what does everyone say? Take a lot of magnesium. You should incorporate magnesium. And I'm like, I see that being a problem, because we have to have good sodium to balance with the magnesium. And if we don't have that, the adrenals are actually, if they're sedated, kind of low cortisol, they're not working as well as they should. If you have that where it's at that imbalance, you're going to see lower adrenal function even more if you add in the magnesium, which acts as a sedative to the adrenal glands, without adding in the sodium, which balances with that to make it effective. So that is something that oftentimes, and in pregnancy, sometimes I find people can get away with the magnesium, with still doing the sodium and potassium, but they don't actually have that, where you work on that for 6 weeks or 2 months, and then you add the magnesium. Depending on the woman, typically their body, and when you're in pregnancy, you're going to be in what we call a fast oxidizer state. So there's kind of 2 states that you can be in, fast and slow. And in pregnancy, you're going to be in that faster state. And typically this requires more of magnesium, but also sodium and potassium. So sometimes people can get away with it, but especially for people listening, as far as if they take magnesium and they notice that it does the reverse of what it's supposed to do. So the things that magnesium is supposed to do is make us more relaxed, make us be able to sleep better, make us have a better mood. Well, if they take it and it makes them more anxious and not be able to sleep, and maybe they have some digestive disturbance like diarrhea, then we know, okay, their body is not ready to hang on to that magnesium yet. So we're going to put in the sodium and potassium to make sure that that is utilized properly and kind of calm the adrenals, get the adrenals ready to go and handle that input of the magnesium, because it is a sedative. Like, magnesium is kind of a calming sedative. But in some people, if their adrenals are not at the right place, you'll see the opposite. They'll have the total opposite effect of that. But that's where trying it or seeing how you do with it is beneficial. So some people add in magnesium. They're like, that's the secret thing that I needed to be able to sleep. That's like the magic bullet for me. And then other people add in, they're like, now I'm sleeping worse. And for those people, I'm like, all right, we need to get the sodium and potassium, up a little bit more so that that can have the effect that it needs to in order for magnesium to work. So
it's interesting. They want people on a low salt diet too. Or,
yes.
Or
that's the irony.
Or if you're eating processed foods, they're getting refined salt, so it doesn't have all the other minerals in it. So
exactly, yes, that's a huge one. People do that. Oh, I'm on a low salt diet, and I'm like, okay, low sodium chloride that you're getting in fast food is different from the mineral salt that you're using that has all the other minerals that needs to make it more effective, for the body.
So I hope this is an eye-opener to any of the listeners. Like, the information that we've been given is not really accurate. And that's the whole goal of me starting up this podcast, is to dispel a lot of this misinformation, I should say.
Yes. Yeah, it is. And especially pregnant women are the recipient of a lot of this, like the poor information. I'll see women all the time who are told, don't eat salt, just eat 300 extra calories, work out every day. And a lot of them are not having a good experience. And you can look at what they're recommending and draw parallels from that all day and be like, wow, well, no wonder. No wonder they don't feel good.
So I want to touch on anemia, because I know you mentioned vitamin A. I believe you follow Morley Robbins' work.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, I've read his book, and I've been practicing a lot of his stuff too, the starts and the stops, and they've definitely helped me out.
Yes.
So anemia is the big one that a lot of women hear, I guess. So up the iron stores. Could you go into the relationship between vitamin A, ceruloplasmin, and copper, iron, that whole thing? Because I maybe condense that, because I know that's going to be something that blows people's mind. And this is a common recommendation that pregnant women will get.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. So anemia it's a huge one. And I see that very frequently. That's the number one thing that people in pregnancy, one of the biggest quote unquote problems is, they'll tell my hemoglobin's low. Oh no, my hemoglobin's low. So in pregnancy, women's bodies actually become more efficient at using sequestering iron. Like that's something that they notice that is, more, they actually notice that. Oh, actually my daughter's here. Do you mind editing this out?
Not this from Big Papa's birthday.
Yeah. Now you can take this. Hold on. You can take this music in here. Take this to your room. Don't go in Ethan's room. Okay. Don't go in Ethan's room. All right. Sorry about that.
Good afternoon.
Yes, that's my first. Close the door. Make sure you close the door and don't go in his room. But yes, so with the anemia, it's really cool because a lot of people will be told again, I've got to get that level up. I've got to get the hemoglobin up. And what they're not told is that the body is in pregnancy very good at managing iron and actually utilizing it, because it's using that to make the hemoglobin go higher, grow the blood volume, and support all the functions in the body. So with this too, retinol is the missing ingredient for many people, because retinol combines with copper to create ceruloplasmin. And ceruloplasmin is this protein that is the missing link for iron utilization. And most people do not know this. They're just told, your hemoglobin's low, your ferritin's low. Let's add more, more iron to the mix. And in reality, most women don't have the cofactors that they need to be able to use that iron in the first place. So they're given iron, they're given a bunch of different solutions with iron, and it ends up being that they don't improve their hemoglobin, but now they have more iron stored in their tissues, which creates a host of other issues. But really, the ceruloplasmin is what allows us to be able to properly regulate iron. So we have this system in our body where the iron is being recycled. It's actually moving through this cycle so that the body can liberate it into the bloodstream, store it, and then bring it back through. So there's this whole cycle, and that cycle, a critical ingredient of it is copper plus vitamin A, which equals ceruloplasmin. And this is something in all of Morley's work, as far as his book, I read his book too. It's so good because there's that connection too in pregnancy that also for women. So for example, with hemoglobin, they've actually done studies and they have found that women who have lower hemoglobin levels have better outcomes in terms of postpartum hemorrhage and a lot of other anemic issues, quote unquote, in pregnancy when they have a lower hemoglobin level. And that's because in pregnancy, when the body is expanding that blood volume, typically you're going to see the level of hemoglobin in the blood. You're going to see that drop a little bit as she gets further along in her pregnancy. So for example, you start off your pregnancy with maybe your hemoglobin is like a 13.5 on your test. And then you do a test at 34 weeks, 35 weeks, and it goes maybe to 12.7. Some doctors will go, you need to supplement iron because your hemoglobin's dropping. No, if they're actually educated in blood volume expansion, because think about it, pregnant women's making 40 to 50% more blood. So if the sample that you have there, if that hemoglobin is going up, it would mean the blood is becoming more concentrated. It's not expanding and growing as it should. We already know that for example, a blood test, if you run a blood test and somebody has a hemoglobin that's higher, it can mean the person's dehydrated because their blood is now more concentrated, and the sample that they're testing of the hemoglobin is actually testing more hemoglobin because it's more concentrated. Likewise, in pregnancy, if that doesn't drop, the hemoglobin doesn't drop because that blood is expanding, then you're going to know that that person is not actually efficiently growing the volume of blood. So it's kind of the dehydration, but also in pregnancy, if that expansion's not happening, that hemoglobin may stay the same, but it needs to drop just a little bit. And most of the women that I've worked with, 34, 35 weeks, if they compare a blood test then to earlier in their pregnancy, where maybe it was, a point or half a point higher, they see that drop and we know, cool, blood volume expansion, it's actually happening. We're creating more blood because now our hemoglobin has dropped a little bit. And that is something that Morley mentions in his work as far as the lower hemoglobin. Again, we're not talking like at 7 hemoglobin, we're talking like, in the 10 to 12 is like the range for that at the end of pregnancy. So not starting off pregnancy with an 11 hemoglobin, but at the end, that actually means that expansion happened. But it's crucial to understand too that most women with the iron, they're not having all the markers run. So in pregnancy, ferritin is extremely unreliable. I have women all the time, oh, my midwife told me I need to supplement iron because my ferritin is at a 10 or at a 20. Well, same principle applies when the blood volume is expanding, that's going to drop. It is not reliable outside of like the early first trimester, ferritin, which is what most doctors will test. It is not reliable. And we really need to understand all of the other markers, because there's also nutrients that's like we're talking about copper and vitamin A together making ceruloplasmin. We also need good B vitamin levels. So we need good folate, we need good B12 in order to make those red blood cells and to regulate that whole system. So it really is something that most people are not told, like, hey, you might actually just need more copper and vitamin A to boost the ability of the body to use that iron, because it's always moving it through the tissues into the blood and then recycling that through. It actually recycles an appreciable amount of iron every day, but we have to have the cofactors to run that, or it's not going to work. And you're going to see women who are told that they're anemic, they're taking iron, does nothing. And then even some midwives will kick people out of their practice if their levels below, if they're below, I think it's 11. If it's below 11, they're going to kick you out because you can't have a home birth, because they're worried that if you have hemorrhage after birth, you may, your hemoglobin's drop lower and you may go into shock or something. But they completely ignore the research we have that shows that women who have, their hemoglobin levels aren't getting higher, they're actually getting a little bit lower because that blood volume expansion is happening. They completely ignore the evidence that we have, knowing that it's less dangerous to have a good grown blood volume than someone who just is, their numbers look good, but they functionally do not have that proper expansion in the blood volume. So that's kind of a little complicated there with the numbers on the hemoglobin and all that, but it's very interesting to me that there are multiple components, both with the iron, the nutrients to support that. But honestly, for most women, now there's a subset where maybe there's something else going on with them, but a lot of people just need those two components, the copper and the vitamin A, to help them create ceruloplasmin, the protein that regulates the iron and the usage of it. And it's just it's oftentimes the missing link, and it doesn't help. And honestly, I'm kind of like, the conspiracy theory wing of my brain is kind of like, okay, so we're making people afraid of vitamin A, right? Like that's a known thing. Anytime I talk about vitamin A, I was told not to do too much liver or, whole food sources of vitamin A because I might cause my baby birth defects. And I'm like, okay, yes, we know that there are certain, degrees, like we talked about, beta carotene, artificial retinol, palmitate that is supplemented that can cause a problem, but not from whole food. They're made to be afraid of it, when in reality, that's the very thing that they need to use copper and then be able to use iron. So it's like, it's a whole thing with that is just, it's hard to watch because people are told a whole bunch of, things that aren't all the way true about it. And I just feel like people, if they could understand that mechanism, that it would help them make better choices about what they want to do in terms of their care when it comes to iron.
And I didn't know I was going to have a conspiracy theorist on my show. I may need to, no, just kidding.
Yeah.
You're in the right place. Yeah, I mean, the iron is added to the food. There's a fortification program. I know that.
Yes, yes.
And so really briefly, when they are getting the recommendation for the iron supplementation, they actually do take it. They're probably going to feel like crap.
Yes.
But what is that showing on the test? So that number that they're initially getting from the first hemoglobin test, and then they start supplementing with the iron, it's just going to go up, and that's what they're looking for?
Yes, that's all the providers, literally the only thing they care about is the numbers. And that's what bugs me, is they're like, oh, just the number. So if you get the hemoglobin up, to them, they're like, okay, that's great. When actually in the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecologists, they used to teach this in medical school. I don't know if they do anymore, but they used to teach that. It's called the natural hemodilution of pregnancy. In fact, if you Google that, hemodilution of pregnancy, it'll teach you, hey, when a pregnant woman is gaining 40 to 50% more blood, her hemoglobin can naturally drop because we have more blood and it's more distributed in the sample and it's not as concentrated. And yet they still make that recommendation for, oh, we just want to see your hemoglobin go up. That's all we care about. Like that, they don't care about how well the woman's eating. And even Dr. Brewer, one of the things he says in one of his books is he says you could have two women who have the same hemoglobin level. Maybe it's like, let's just for sake of argument, let's say it's 12.7. So they have the same hemoglobin level. One could be really well nourished, have a good blood volume because she's been eating well, she's been putting in those components. And then the other one maybe does not. Maybe they are not, because you can't really measure the expansion unless you see the outcomes that are an indicator of an issue with the expansion, if that makes sense. So for example, you couldn't measure that, but hemoglobin is a kind of good way to like zoom in and kind of see what's happening with that. But for someone, if it stays the same, so the hemoglobin never changes, never drops, and also the hematocrit, which is the number that is on the blood test below the hemoglobin, that one should drop a little bit too. But those two together are usually what is analyzed when it comes to, oh, do we want you to supplement with iron? But yeah, then you could have those two women and one could be malnourished, one could be doing really well. And it just depends on what they've been eating and how they've been treating their body in terms of the inputs. So.
I wanted to add, there's two more that I really wanted to get into. I didn't understand the gestational diabetes test, thank God. That was flying colors, but it confused me. And maybe you could shed some light on this, but logically, it doesn't make much sense to me. They're testing women with glucola if they need to drink that, which, look at the ingredients in it. I probably wouldn't want to do that on any day of the year.
Yeah.
And now it's just this huge like influx of sugar, highly refined sugar. And how does it make sense to do that type of test for gestational diabetes if that's not something that the woman would typically eat ever? When is she ever getting that much sugar? Luckily, we were able to kind of avoid the glucola. We had to go with like a kosher grape juice, I believe it was. And she felt like crap afterwards. But I'm like, this doesn't make much sense because on a normal day, she would never do this.
Yes. So. Yeah. There's so many flaws with that, and really the main reason I think they do it is because they have to standardize. They just want you. Again, they're all about the numbers. They don't care if your number comes back good on the glucose tolerance test, but you feel like crap afterward. They don't care. They're just like, we want to see you in this range and this number. And usually the physiology behind that is that people want to be able to be able to categorize. Here you're safe and you're not high risk, and these people are high risk, and they use that cutoff. So the idea behind it is you put that sugar input, which again is much higher than a woman would take in during a day, in that refined, like they don't normally drink that much. So you're adding that input, and then they test you. They wait a certain amount of time, usually just an hour or so, and then they test your blood just to see how well your body mobilized that out of the system. But what this creates is oftentimes for women who aren't drinking 50 plus grams of sugar in one like small glass. What it does for most of them is their body is like, whoa, hang on a minute. Like we are not used to this huge influx of glucose. So it's really struggling. It's like, okay, try to get this out, into the cells, out of the bloodstream. And sometimes people end up with a false negative, like, oh, you didn't pass your gestational diabetes test, when a lot of times the woman's perfectly healthy. She has no pre-existing pathology, and it's just her body's like not able to handle it. And so there, of course, like you guys doing the alternative with the grape juice. Some people do the grape juice. Some people do the the jelly beans for that test too. And then other people will just test their blood sugar. So they'll like test it throughout the day and just see where it is at in terms of how their body is handling that. Because honestly, sometimes the stress of like going in there for the test and then being like, stress will also mess with your blood sugar. So it's like the perfect recipe for false negatives, and then women not getting the care that they would like. Now, I will say something very interesting that I learned. If you do a A1C, so that's a historical blood sugar, 3 months of data as far as the average. If you do that in the first trimester, a woman can actually predict. It's a predictable way to see if she will be able to pass the gestational diabetes test, if she's going to a place where they do the testing for it. And it's in the 90%. As far as ruling that out. So if a woman has the A1C and it's between, I believe the range is 4.9 to 5.5, like that's the sliding scale. If it's within that range, she has a above 90% chance of passing the blood glucose test if it was performed, in her second or third trimester. So some women will opt to do that, and then they'll opt to do a test as far as the testing for themselves to see how it handles it in a low stress environment in their in their normal day. But a lot of people will say that there's two camps on gestational diabetes, the pathology itself. Some people will say, oh, it's totally invented. This doesn't ever happen. Like, it's just something that the medical, which honestly, sometimes I like lean in that direction when I see someone who everything else is healthy. Their baby's a good size. And their blood sugar runs a quote unquote little high, according to their doctor. There's people who are like, oh, it's just a way of catching people to try to risk people out of care. So there's that camp, and then there's the camp that's like, no, if your blood sugar does any variation beyond this medicalized standard, you're high risk and we can't work with you. So there's like this, there's this spectrum, and I'm kind of in the middle. I do see it where a woman, let's say their fasting blood sugar is 140. Yeah, there's something going on there. But if a woman's fasting blood sugar, maybe it's in the 90s, maybe it's a little bit in the hundreds towards the end, her body is working so hard to break down food and use it for energy. And in fact, in Anne Fry's book, The Diagnostic Tests for Childbearing Years, she has a lot of good information. That book is actually still, you can get it on Amazon. It's got like a ton of information in it. It isn't out of print, which is nice. But she has kind of a different view in that she's like, yes, gestational diabetes exists, but also it's overdiagnosed. So women have healthy pregnancies, maybe their blood sugar likes to run a little bit higher, but they have no issues in the rest of the day when they test it. There's no abnormal pathology there. So I'm kind of in the middle. I think it can exist. But I also think that it's for reasons like we were talking about, it's way overdiagnosed. And then it makes women stress about it. Maybe their provider is pressuring them. And it's just, stress is never good for a pregnant lady. You don't want to stress the pregnant ladies out. Like, it's not nice to do. So
I imagine it. I mean, I feel like it should be a fun experience, not this whole.
Yeah.
It doesn't make a lot of sense. Like, you shouldn't be stressed out over absolutely everything. And where are these standards coming from?
Mm-hmm. That's the thing too, is like, where are those standards? Because some women naturally, like I said, I'll have women who will have, almost a 10-pound baby, and they had no sign of gestational diabetes, no issues. Dr. Brewer always said that babies from 7.5 to 10 pounds, that's like the nourished baby range as far as like full term, getting to full term, being in that range. And, a lot of times they use that big baby to scare people about, oh, if you have gestational diabetes and it's, our standards, you're not fitting our standards, then you might have a big baby. And guess what? They're scared of big babies because they think that women's bodies can't handle birthing a certain size baby. So it all goes back to like what they want to deal with and what they want to risk out, and not have to be presented with something that they're not used to dealing with a lot, like a large, healthy baby.
It's like our bodies are not capable of doing what we've done for generations somehow.
Right. Somehow we all got here.
Yeah.
And most of our forebears, very minimal prenatal care. They probably did raw eggs in the afternoon, like we were talking about earlier, like all these dangerous things. And, we're all here. Somehow the earth was populated with people who didn't have the same stringent medical standards that we're all held to today.
Okay. So one of the last things that I want to kind of get into here is preeclampsia. And go figure, as we were going through this course, one of my clients, they actually had a employee that had a seizure, and they had to deliver the baby then pretty much that same day.
Yes. Yep.
So if you want to explain what preeclampsia is and how the placenta kind of gets the role of the bad guy here somehow, some way.
Yes.
They don't know what they're doing. But yeah, if you can go into preeclampsia a little bit.
Yes, I'd be glad to. So preeclampsia is a prenatal condition that refers to a couple of criteria. It refers to high blood pressure. So, steadily high blood pressure, usually in 140s over 90 is kind of the threshold for high, technically. It also includes another pathology, which is protein in the urine, which means the kidneys are under stress. So usually it's diagnosed by high blood pressure, protein in the urine, and then also as far as the woman's swelling and water retention. So severe swelling and water retention. It's usually those three. And typically they will even diagnose it if it's just the high blood pressure and protein in the urine. They will do a 24-hour urine collection and tell you, okay, you have early preeclampsia or you're developing it. So it can be dangerous. The reason why it's dangerous is because high blood pressure can affect the health of the baby, the mom, like you said, seizures. You can develop seizures. That's the severe, like end stage eclampsia, where you actually have seizures. But there's a spectrum of preeclampsia. You can have early preeclampsia where it is 300 or so above in your the level of the 24-hour urine test that you have done. You can have severe where it's like into the thousands, so it's 3 times that, where your kidneys are actively having trouble dealing with the increased demand on their function. But it is one of those where that's what a lot of them are watching for. It's one of the ones that's purported as the scariest of the pregnancy complications. So typically with this, there's a lot of modern, for example, when I was told, you might be on the road to developing that with my first child, I did some research and I was like, all of them are saying that it's the placenta that's causing the problem. It's the body developed a weird relationship reaction to the placenta, and it's always the placenta's fault. I've noticed that about a lot of the mainstream medical stuff is that in pregnancy, it's always the placenta's fault. Literally everything. Gestational diabetes, it's the placenta's fault. Preeclampsia, it's the placenta's fault. Like it literally goes back. Baby not being nourished, it's the placenta's fault. It's not the lack of input that the body is receiving. It's always the placenta. They blame it for literally everything. And what we know, of course, from the research, like I was talking about, Dr. Tom Brewer, he is the king of the preeclampsia and eclampsia research, because almost all of his books have that as the basis as far as explaining what it is and how we can develop it in pregnancy and his experience clinically with people developing it. So today, if you ask someone who is a modern medical personnel, nurse, OB, they'll tell you, we have no idea why this happens. We don't know. We think it's the placenta, but we don't know. Dr. Brewer, on the other hand, found out that in his clinical research, he found that women who were undernourished and not growing their blood volume appropriately, kind of like we were talking about earlier with that expansion, 40 to 50% more blood in the body, he found that the women who were not able to do that or had issues with the nutritional input, so they're not eating enough overall calories, they're not eating enough protein, they're not having enough salt. He found that those 3 categories with some subsets as far as vitamins and minerals that support that as well. But those are 3 of the big legs of his research. Not enough protein, not enough calories, not enough salt. And when a woman doesn't have those components there, she cannot grow that blood volume, the osmotic pressure. So in pregnancy, preeclampsia usually starts by the blood pressure goes up. and it's stubborn. Usually they won't be able to get it down. They may have to deliver the baby because it is so stubborn. And that speaks to the gradual development. It develops at a certain point. You start having issues with it. Maybe you don't realize it until it's fully started. The blood volume's not been growing appropriately. And so what Dr. Brewer realized was that when a woman has those components in, so she's getting enough protein, she's getting enough overall calories, she's getting these categories of food, she's getting, eggs in her diet, she's getting some, proper carbohydrates, she's, getting the fats, and she's getting salt in the diet, that protected not only against preeclampsia, but a constellation of other pregnancy issues relating to poor blood volume expansion, because that blood volume is what's pushing the nutrients into the placenta to deliver them to the baby. It's what's promoting your body's own, immune system working with the baby and, protecting the baby against, other inputs as far as malnutrition. So one of the things that he would see along with preeclampsia is IUGR, which is intrauterine growth retardation. That's something that he found connected to this low blood volume as well. Most doctors will talk about blood volume expansion as if it's something that happens automatically. It's just like, oh, when you're pregnant, your body makes 40 to 50% more blood. Isn't that cool? They don't say, hey, you need to be supplying your body with the minerals, nutrients, vitamins, proteins, sodium chloride, potassium, magnesium. You need to supply it with what it needs in order to provide that output, which is 40 to 50% more blood, which is a lot of additional blood. And if someone's having twins, it's about, it's almost 100% more blood that you're making. It's a lot. But they treat it like it's automatic. That just happens. Now, we know that when the body doesn't have what it needs, it dips into its stores in the body. It can store things in the tissues and the bones and the other cells and tissues of the body. But we also know that when it doesn't have that and it can't dip into that, then you see pathology in terms of the body not being able to keep up with the demands that are being placed on it. And especially with the preeclampsia. Now, something else interesting that I think is worth noting is that in preeclampsia, when you don't develop the blood volumes, let's say you got it 30% and it should be 50%. And this is something I explained to you in the course, but it's basically like your body senses that you have less blood than you should for this whole balancing act of creating a baby. You have less blood than you should, and it causes your body to almost go into this shock type of reaction that causes the kidneys to secrete renin, and renin causes a hormonal cascade that drives the blood pressure up. And that's when you see high blood pressure, body's under stress. It's like your body's panicking. It's like, wow, we have a whole human in here and we can't supply it with what it needs. So we got to get this out. Like we got to get this baby out. Sometimes preterm labor as well, like really early preterm, the body's like, we're not able to keep up with this demand. Let's just get this baby out. Let's just preterm labor contractions, get the baby out because we can't supply the baby with what they need. So that shock factor is typically, if that's not resolved, you'll see the high blood pressure, swelling because the kidneys are under intense stress. You will see the seizures. Usually for most women, it starts with like a headache, really bad headache, vision changes, and they may have extreme swelling as well. But one of the bright side of all this, I'm talking about all the scary, preeclampsia, is that Dr. Brewer could see women if they caught it early enough. So let's say you have you're noticing your blood pressure starting to creep up a little bit. If you catch it early enough, if you start providing the correct input, you can not only stop it from continuing or getting worse. In a lot of cases, if you start this early enough, you can see it not be an issue at all. I have had multiple clients. They had preeclampsia. They were told, we don't know what causes this, so sorry, you may have it every time. Second baby, wow, no preeclampsia, no blood pressure issues, nothing. And it was just amazing that they could see that difference in their subsequent pregnancies. And like I said, for myself as well, first daughter had some issues with that, despite being very athletic, eating well, quote unquote. And then with my son, no issues whatsoever. My blood pressure literally stayed the same the whole time. Never had a scare where I was like, oh my gosh, it's getting hot, So you can actually do things, and that's kind of what his work teaches is you can turn it around, eat more protein, get some potassium, sodium to help support that in terms of the physiology of the body, because it can be worked on. But again, a lot of the medical establishment just doesn't pay attention to his stuff. They're like, well, we prefer to just, not know how this happens and just tell people that it's your fate. Too bad. We don't know how this occurs. But that's kind of some of the cliff notes on that. But it's become something that I'm very passionate about, but also have kind of, like, after my own experience, I had to kind of become my own expert. And like, I literally would read everything that he wrote on it. I looked up all of the etiology and physiology on it. And it's become kind of one of my niches that I like to focus on. So.
It's a shame that a lot of women, if they don't know where to look, they'll never hear anything like this.
Mm-hmm.
And I've often said before, it's like your struggle is for you. It was meant for you to overcome. That way that you can be the light bearer for the people that are going to follow you, follow down your path, because people are not alone. Like, I'm sure someone has experienced what you've experienced and they found another way to get through it. But if you keep going down the mainstream medical route, you probably will not find any of this type of stuff. So I'm so thankful that you put together this course, and I cannot recommend it highly enough to anyone, any women or couples, honestly, because it takes two. Anyone that's looking to get pregnant or is currently pregnant, this stuff has been an absolute game changer. And Margaret put it together in a way that is so easily digestible. And as I said, there's stuff in there for the guys too. I dropped my Lululemons and now with 100% organic cotton or hemp shorts. And it's the little things that really make the biggest difference. Margaret is also a wealth of knowledge. I know that I'm going to have you back on the show because there are so many different things that we can go into. I know there's the T-tap, lymph drainage, stuff that I want to get into. I think it's too much for one to just be overbearing for a lot of the listeners. So I do definitely want to have you back. And I would highly suggest that everyone that is listening to this, you follow Margaret on Instagram. She puts out so much good content.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
So, Margaret, where can the listeners find you? I know you post up a lot on Instagram, but is there anywhere else?
Yes, I do have a Facebook page as well. And I have a YouTube channel. Both of those are, I have them as Mind-Body Fitness and it's with Margaret usually, is the way to find me on there. And then I also have a website, which is mb-fitness.com. And that's kind of my website. I have some classes on there too. And then also Instagram. I honestly like Instagram. I feel like I've connected with a lot of really cool people like yourself on there. So I enjoy all those platforms.
So I'll post up all that information in the show notes. Definitely tag you in the post when I release this. It'll be out tomorrow. Nice. And this stuff is really important. So again, I'm very grateful that you created this course. You clearly are very passionate about it. And this is the type of stuff that I believe people need now more than ever. This is the type of stuff that should be taught in school, in the public education system, but it's not. And then unfortunately, you have these people that will go spend 12 plus years throughout school, and then they come out the other end and they really are lost. They don't have any idea what they're doing. And then when they go to the people that have gone through that same route, they can't provide them answers either. So,
Yes, absolutely.
Cool. So thank you again so much, Margaret, for joining, and I look forward to having you on in the future.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. This is really fun. This is one of my favorite topics. So I appreciate you having me on to chat about it. So
you have so much to talk about. It's awesome.
Yes, I do.
Last thing that I want to add.
Yes.
Margaret, I peeped some of her YouTube channel before, and she had an absolutely incredible transformation. Like, it's night and day. She's barely recognizable from where she was from. So I look to people like that can actually lead by example, and they walk the talk. So definitely recommend you look at her content.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you again, Margaret.
Thank you. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.